The Pirate King took hostages, she walked in alone and left with victory. Part 1. The Crimson Tide was the largest pirate ship in the known galaxy, and it hung in the darkness of space like a metal beast waiting to feed. Captain Varos the Undying stood on its bridge and watched the space station below him with cold satisfaction in his 4 eyes. He was Corvussi, a species known for their strength and their cruelty, and he had spent 40 years building a reputation that made even the bravest warriors hesitate before speaking his name. Today, he held 300 hostages on Kepler Station, and the entire galaxy was watching. The hostages were gathered in the central atrium of the station, a massive circular room with glass walls that showed the stars outside. Among them were diplomats from 12 different species, merchants and traders who had been unlucky enough to be on the station when the pirates attacked, and most importantly, children. 37 children, including the daughter of High Chancellor Myra Okonkwo, the most powerful political leader in the Galactic Confederation-verse, had planned this raid for 2 years, and everything had gone exactly as he wanted. His soldiers, massive Kavathi warriors with scales that shimmered like oil on water, stood guard around the hostages with plasma rifles ready to fire at the first sign of trouble. Pirate King had made his demands clear in a broadcast that reached every corner of civilized space. 10 billion credits transferred to accounts he controlled. The release of his 12 lieutenants, who were currently rotting in Confederation prison facilities. Safe passage through Confederation space for the next 50 years with a guarantee that no military vessel would pursue him, and if these demands were not met within 72 hours, he would begin executing hostages one by one, starting with the children, and he would broadcast every death live across the galactic network. The response from the Confederation was immediate and chaotic within hours of the broadcast. Ships from every major species began arriving at the edge of the Kepler system, keeping a safe distance from the Crimson Tide but close enough to respond if given the order. The Volanthi sent their finest telepaths, beings with minds so powerful they could reach across the void of space and touch the thoughts of others. But Varos had prepared for this. His ship was lined with psionic dampeners that blocked any mental intrusion. The Draxer, a warrior species with 8 limbs and exoskeletons harder than most metals, proposed a direct assault, confident that their shock troops could breach the station and neutralize the pirates before too many hostages were killed. Military analysts calculated the likely casualty rate at between 40 and 60% of the hostages. The Syndicate, a collective of artificial intelligences that had achieved sentience 3 centuries ago, ran 17 million simulations of possible outcomes and determined that any military action had a success probability of less than 3%. Diplomatic solutions fared little better in their calculations. For 3 days the leaders argued and debated while the clock continued to count down toward the first execution. High Chancellor Okonkwo watched the feeds from Kepler Station with red eyes that had not seen sleep since the crisis began. Her daughter Amara was only 9 years old, and she had been on the station for a school field trip when the pirates attacked. Every time the Chancellor closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's face, frightened and confused, surrounded by aliens who would kill her without hesitation if their demands were not met. In the morning of the 3rd day, with only 20 hours remaining before the deadline, a human transport shuttle arrived at the edge of the Kepler system. It was a small vessel, barely large enough for a crew of 4, and it carried no weapons that the scanners could detect. Shuttle transmitted its credentials to the Confederation command ship and requested permission to approach the station when Admiral Tereth, a Volanthi with silver skin and eyes like pools of liquid mercury, reviewed the shuttle's manifest. He found only one passenger, Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, File was unremarkable by galactic standards. She was 53 years old. Born on Earth in a city called Buenos Aires, and she had served in the diplomatic corps for 31 years. She had no cybernetic enhancements, no psionic abilities, no military training beyond the basic self. Defense courses required of all diplomatic personnel. She had negotiated trade disputes and border conflicts and refugee crises throughout her career, but she had never faced anything like this. Admiral Tarath granted her request to board the command ship, more out of curiosity than any expectation that she could help. When Elena stepped onto the bridge of the command vessel, every eye turned to look at her. She was not impressive. In any physical sense, her hair was dark with streaks of gray and cut short in a practical style. Her face was lined with age, and her hands bore the calluses and small scars of someone who had worked hard throughout her life. She wore the simple uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, a dark blue suit with no medals or decorations. She looked around the room at the assembled admirals and generals and diplomats, beings from species that had conquered stars while humanity was still learning to make fire. And she did not seem intimidated. "I have a proposal," she said, and her voice was calm and clear. "I will go to the station and speak with Varus directly." The room erupted in objections. A Draxer general clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter or might have been contempt. One human female against Varus the Undying and his army of killers? You would die before you finished your first sentence. Possibly, Elena agreed, but I would go unarmed and alone, which means no one else would die with me. And perhaps I could buy some time for a better solution to present itself. This is foolishness. Admiral Tarath said, "You have no leverage. No weapons, no power to offer or threaten. What could you possibly say to a creature like Varus that would make him listen?" Elena looked at the Admiral with steady brown eyes that held no fear. "I do not know yet," she admitted, "but I know that every other option on this table leads to dead children. And I am not willing to accept that outcome without trying something else first." She turned to look at the display screen that showed the station and the massive pirate ship hovering above it. "My species has been talking our way out of impossible situations for a very long time. Admiral, it is perhaps the only thing we do better than anyone else in the galaxy. Let me try." The debate lasted for another 2 hours, but in the end, there was no better option with 16 hours remaining before the first execution. Commander Elena Vasquez boarded a small shuttle and flew alone to Ward Kepler Station. She carried no weapons and no communication devices, and no plan beyond the simple belief that if she could just get Varus to talk to her, really talk to her, she might find a way through. Behind her, the gathered fleet of the Galactic Confederation watched and waited and prepared for the worst ahead. Of her waited a monster who had killed more beings than most plagues, and who had every reason to add one more human body to his long list of victims. Elena closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her grandmother who had survived a war on Earth by hiding in the mountains, and who had told her stories about the power of words to change hearts and minds. Then she opened her eyes and flew forward into the unknown. The shuttle docked at Kepler Station with a soft thump that Elena felt through the solace of her boots. She sat in the pilot's seat for a moment longer and breathed slowly, in and out, the way her training had taught her to do before entering a dangerous situation. Her heart was beating faster than normal, but her hands were steady. She had been afraid before, many times in her career, and she had learned that fear was not the enemy. Fear was just information, a signal from her body that something important was about to happen. What mattered was what she chose to do with that fear. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped out onto the station. 4 Kavati soldiers were waiting for her, each one standing nearly 7 feet tall with scales that shifted color in the artificial light. They had 4 arms each, and every arm held a weapon of some kind. Plasma rifles and shot batons and curved blades that looked sharp enough to cut through bone. Their eyes, all 4 of them on each face, fixed on Elena with expressions that she could not read. The largest of the soldiers stepped forward and spoke in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "You are the human negotiator? I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Diplomatic Corps," she said. "I am here to speak with Captain Varos." The soldier made a sound that might have been a laugh. The captain is surprised that the Confederation sent only one, and such a small one at that. He expected warriors, or at least someone with weapons. "I have no weapons," Elena said. "You are welcome to search me if you wish." The search was thorough and not gentle. The soldiers ran scanners over every inch of her body and examined every pocket and seam of her uniform. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Elena had come to this station with nothing but her words and her will and her stubborn human refusal to accept that some problems had no solutions. When the search was complete, the soldiers looked at each other with something that might have been confusion. They had been prepared for tricks and traps and hidden weapons. They had not been prepared for a middle-aged human woman who carried nothing at all. "Follow," the lead soldier said, and they began to walk. The corridor that led from the docking bay to the central atrium was half a kilometer long, and Elena walked it slowly, matching her pace to the heavy footsteps of her escorts. She used the time to observe her surroundings. The station was old, but well-maintained. A trading hub that had served this sector of space for more than a century. The walls were decorated with artwork from a dozen different cultures, and the floors were worn smooth by countless feet. Now the station felt like a tomb. The usual bustle of merchants and travelers was gone, replaced by the heavy silence of fear. Occasionally, Elena passed a window that looked out into space, and she could see the crimson tide hanging above the station like a predator waiting to strike. The ship was massive, bristling with weapons, and armored with plates of metal thick enough to withstand a direct hit from a military cruiser. Varos had built his empire on that ship, and he had used it to terrorize innocent beings across 17 star systems. As she walked, Elena thought about what she knew of the pirate king. Varos the Undying had earned his name by surviving situations that should have killed him. Many times over, he had been shot and stabbed and poisoned, and once even spaced, thrown out of an airlock without a suit. But somehow he had survived every attempt on his life. Some said he had made a deal with dark powers, while others claimed he had technology hidden beneath his scales that made him nearly immortal. Elena did not believe in dark powers, and she doubted the technology explanation as well. She thought that Varos had survived so long because he was smart and ruthless, and because he never stopped being afraid. That fear had kept him alive, but it had also made him into a monster. The corridor ended at a massive set of doors that had been sealed and locked. Beyond those doors, Elena could hear the sounds of hundreds of beings. The quiet crying of children, the murmured prayers of diplomats, the tense silence of people waiting to die. The lead soldier entered a code into the door panel, and the doors slid open. Elena stepped through into the central atrium and stopped. The room was enormous. A circular space 3 stories tall, with a domed ceiling made of transparent material that showed the stars above. Normally, this room would be filled with vendors and travelers. A busy marketplace at the heart of the station. Now it was filled with hostages. 300 beings from a dozen different species sat or stood or lay on the floor, surrounded by armed Korvathi soldiers. Energy barriers had been erected around the group, invisible walls that would shock anyone who tried to pass through them. The hostages looked exhausted and terrified. Many of them had been awake for 3 days. Too scared to sleep, the children were huddled together in the center of the group, and Elena spotted a young human girl with dark skin and braided hair who she recognized from the briefing files as Amara Akonko, the chancellor's daughter. The girl was holding the hand of another child. a Volanthe boy whose silver skin had gone dull with fear, and her eyes were wide but dry. She had stopped crying sometime in the past 3 days. Too tired or too scared for tears, Elena's heart ached at the sight, but she kept her face calm at the far end of the atrium. Seated on a chair that had been taken from one of the station's offices and positioned like a throne, was Varos the Undying. He was larger than his soldiers, nearly 8 feet tall when he stood, and his scales were a deep crimson color that matched the name of his ship. His 4 eyes watched Elena as she walked across the room toward him, and she could feel the weight of his attention. Like a physical pressure, she did not hurry, and she did not slow down. She walked at the same steady pace she had maintained through the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Every hostage was watching her now. Every soldier had turned to look. This was the moment when everything could go wrong, when one nervous guard or one sudden movement could turn into violence. That would leave her dead on the floor. But nothing happened. Elena walked through the atrium, past the hostages and the guards and the energy barriers, until she stood before the Pirate King himself. Varos looked down at her from his makeshift throne, and his lipless mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "You are smaller than I expected," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "The Confederation sends one small human with no weapons to face me. Is this a joke or an insult?" "Neither," Elena said. "It is the truth, Captain Varos. I am here to talk, nothing more. And I bring nothing with me because I have nothing to offer except my words." Varos leaned forward and his 4 eyes narrowed. "Words will not save these hostages, human. Only credits and freedom will save them. Do you have the authority to give me what I want?" "No," Elena admitted. "I do not have that authority." "Then why are you here?" Elena looked up at the Pirate King, at this monster who had killed thousands and terrorized millions, and she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Beneath the cruelty and the confidence and the power, she saw fear. It was well hidden, buried under decades of violence and survival. But it was there. And in that moment, Elena understood something important. Varos was not just a monster. He was a frightened creature who had found that violence was the only way to keep himself safe in a universe that had hurt him very badly. She took a breath and began to speak. "I am here because I believe there is always another way. Captain, I am here because somewhere in this room there is a solution that does not end with dead children, and I intend to find it." Varos stared at Elena for a long moment, and then he made a sound that she recognized as laughter. It was not a pleasant sound. "You believe there is always another way?" he repeated. "That is the most foolish thing I've ever heard. There is only one way in this universe, human. The strong take what they want, and the weak suffer and die. That is the truth that every species learns eventually." "Perhaps," Elena said. "But may I sit down while we discuss it? I am an old woman, and my legs are tired from the walk." The request seemed to confuse Varos. He had expected threats or pleas or perhaps an assassination attempt. Had not expected a tired human asking for a place to sit. After a moment, he gestured to one of his soldiers, who brought a small chair and placed it in front of the throne. Elena sat down with a sigh of genuine relief. Her legs really were tired, and she knew that the conversation ahead would be long. "Thank you," she said. "Now, Captain Varos, may I ask you a question?" "You may ask," Varos said. "I may not answer." "Fair enough," Elena said. "My question is this. Do you know what makes humans truly dangerous?" Varos tilted his head. A gesture that Elena had learned indicated curiosity among the Korvathi. "I know that humans are weak," he said. "Your bodies are soft and fragile. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom or claws. Your ships are adequate but not exceptional. Your technology is borrowed from older species. What could possibly make you dangerous?" "We remember," Elena said. The answer seemed to puzzle the Pirate King. "All species remember," he said. Memory is not unique to humans. True, Elena agreed. But humans remember in a particular way. We remember our mistakes and we learn from them. We remember our failures and we try not to repeat them, and most importantly, we remember our monsters. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and conversational. My species has existed for a very short time compared to most of the peoples in this galaxy. Only a few 100,000 years. But in that time we have produced more tyrants and warlords and monsters than almost any other species. We have been killing each other since before we learned to write. And we have gotten very good at it. Varo seemed interested despite himself. You speak of your own species as monsters. He said, this is unusual. We are monsters, Elena said. Or we can be. Given the right circumstances, every human carries the potential for great cruelty inside them. We know this because we have seen it happen again and again throughout our history. She paused and looked around the room at the hostages and the guards and the weapons. But here is the important part. Captain, here's the thing that makes humans dangerous. She turned back to Varos, and her brown eyes met his 4 golden ones. Every monster we have ever produced has eventually been defeated. Every tyrant has fallen. Every empire built on cruelty has crumbled to dust. It sometimes takes years or decades or even centuries. But it always happens. You speak of the future as if it is certain, Vara said. Nothing is certain. This is certain, Elena said. I can name 100 human monsters from our history. Kings and emperors and warlords who held absolute power and who seemed unstoppable in their time. Where are they now? They are dust and memories and cautionary tales that we tell our children. She began to list them. Genghis Khan conquered more territory than any human before him. Building an empire on the bones of millions, he died, and his empire shattered within a generation. Adolf Hitler tried to exterminate entire peoples and seemed on the verge of conquering our world. He died alone in a bunker while his cities burned around him. Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, Caligula, Vlad the Impaler. The list goes on and on. Varos was silent, listening. Every one of them believed they were special. Elena continued. Every one of them believed that they had found the secret to permanent power. That fear and violence were enough to keep them safe forever. And every one of them was wrong. You compare me to these humans, Vara said. You think I will end up like them. I think you already know you will. Elena said quietly. That is why you need the hostages. Why you need the guns and the ships and the threats. You are afraid, Captain Varos. You have been afraid for a very long time. And all of this, she gestured at the room around them. All of this is just fear pretending to be strength. The room went very still. Elena could feel the tension in the air. Could sense the soldiers tightening their grips on their weapons. Could hear the hostages holding their breath. She had just said something that could get her. Kill it, Varos could order her. Execution with a single word, and no one in the galaxy would be surprised, but the Pirate King did not give that order. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and studied Elena with an expression she could not read. You are either very brave or very stupid, he said at last. Perhaps both. Elena agreed, but I am also right. And I think you know it, even if you are right, Varos said. What does it matter? I have the hostages. I have the power, whatever happens in the future. Right now I control whether these beings live or die. Yes, Elena said. You do. But that is exactly my point. Captain, you can kill everyone in this room, including me. You can take your credits and your freedom and fly away into the darkness. But it will not make you safe. It will not make you any less afraid. Because somewhere out there, another human like me will be waiting. She leaned forward again. We never stop coming. Captain, that is the thing about humans. You can kill us, and we keep coming. You can defeat us, and we keep coming. You can terrorize us and scatter us and drive us to the edges of the galaxy, and we keep coming. Not because we are brave or strong, but because we are stubborn beyond all reason. We simply refuse to accept that monsters cannot be defeated." Varos was silent for a long moment. "You say you came here with only words," he said finally. "But your words are weapons." "Commander, you are trying to make me afraid." "No," Elena said. "I am trying to show you that you were already afraid. I'm trying to show you that fear has been driving you for your entire life. And I'm trying to offer you something that fear can never give." "And what is that?" Elena took a deep breath. "A choice," she said. "For the first time in perhaps your entire life. A real choice, not between killing or being killed. Not between domination or defeat, but between continuing to be the monster that fear made you, or becoming something else." The Pirate King stared at her, and for just a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker in his golden eyes, something old and tired and desperately hopeful. Then it was gone, hidden behind the mask of the monster again. "You speak pretty words," Varos said, "but words will not save these hostages. Only my demands being met will save them." "Perhaps," Elena said, "but I have not finished speaking yet. And you have not yet decided to kill me, so perhaps, Captain Varos, you would like to hear the rest of what I have to say." Varos gestured with one of his 4 hands. "Speak then." "Human, I am listening." And Elena began to tell him a story. Elena told Varos a story about a planet called Thraxis 7. It was a Corvati colony world on the outer edge of known space. A small and unimportant place that had been home to perhaps 10,000 people. The colony had been established by Corvati families who wanted to live away from the wars and politics of the central systems. Peaceful farmers and traders who had no interest in conquest or violence. 37 years ago, a fleet of raiders had come to Thraxis 7. They were not Corvati, but a species called the Venth. Scaled reptilian creatures who made their living by attacking undefended colonies and selling the survivors as slaves. The raid had been swift and brutal. Most of the colonists were killed in the first few hours, and the rest were loaded onto slave ships and taken to markets on the far side of this galaxy. Among the survivors was a young Corvathi boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old by human counting. He watched his parents die in front of him, and he was taken by the slavers and sold to a mining operation on a world where the sun never shone. For 5 years the boy worked in the mines, treated worse than an animal, beaten and starved and given no hope of escape or rescue. Elena paused in her story and looked at Varos. "That boy was you, was he not, Captain?" Varos said nothing. His 4 eyes had gone very still, and his scales, which usually shifted color with his emotions, had turned a uniform dark gray. "I did my research before I came here," Elena continued. "I know about Thraxis 7. I know about the raid. I know that a boy named Varos was among the survivors who were sold into slavery. And I know that 5 years later, that same boy escaped from the mining colony by killing his overseers and stealing a ship." She leaned back in her chair. "I know that you spent the next decade hunting down every Venth raider who had been part of the attack on your home. I know that you found them and killed them one by one. And I know that when the last one was dead, you discovered that vengeance had not filled the emptiness inside. You know nothing," Varos said, and his voice was quiet and dangerous. "I know enough." Elena said, "I know that you have been running from that frightened boy in the mines ever since. I know that every ship you have captured and every being you have killed has been an attempt to prove that you are no longer weak and helpless. I know that you built this empire of fear because you thought it would keep you safe." She stood up from her chair, slowly, and took a step toward the throne. The soldiers around her tensed, but Varos raised a hand to stop them. "But it has not kept you safe, has it, Captain?" Elena asked. "The fear is still there. Every night when you close your eyes. Every time you enter a room and wonder if this is where someone finally kills you. The mines are still there, in your memories, in your dreams. You have never really escaped. Stop, Varro said. You think you are the only one? Elena asked, and her voice was gentle now, almost kind. You think you are the only being in the universe who has been hurt and broken and made into something they never wanted to be? You think I do not understand? She pulled back the sleeve of her uniform and showed him her arm. There were scars there, old and faded. A pattern of marks that told their own story. I was a refugee once, she said. When I was 17 years old, my city was destroyed in a war. I lost my family, my home, everything I had ever known. I was taken to a camp where we were treated like animals, given barely enough food to survive, and told that we were worthless. Varro stared at the scars on her arm. I wanted to die. Elena continued, and when I did not die, I wanted to hurt the people who had hurt me. I wanted to make them suffer the way they had made me suffer. I understand the anger, Captain. I understand the fear. I understand the desperate need to control everything around you because you could not control what happened to you. She lowered her sleeve. But I also learned something else. Something that took me many years to understand. The anger and the fear. They did not go away just because you hurt other people. Every time you kill or terrorize or dominate, you become more like the people who hurt you, not less. What would you have me do? Varro asked, and there was something in his voice that had not been there before, something raw and uncertain. Surrender? Let the Confederation execute me? Spend the rest of my life in a prison cell? I do not know what will happen if you surrender, Elena admitted. I cannot promise you mercy or justice or anything else. I am not a judge, and I do not have the power to make deals on behalf of the Confederation. Then what are you offering? Elena took another step forward until she was standing directly in front of the pirate. King this close, she could see the scars on his scales. The marks of old wounds that had healed badly. The evidence of a lifetime of violence. I am offering you a choice, she said. Right now. In this room, you can decide who you want to be. You can be Varro the Undying, the monster who killed 300 innocent beings, including children, and spend the rest of your life running from the consequences. Or you can be something else. What else is there? I do not know, Elena said, but that is the point. Captain, when you choose to stop being the monster, when you finally let go of the fear and the anger, you get to find out who you might have been all along. Maybe that person is someone worth knowing, maybe not. But you will never find out if you stay on this path. She reached out and very slowly placed her hand on his arm. His scales were cool and rough under her fingers. The boy from Thoraxis 7 deserved better than what happened to him, she said quietly. He deserved to grow up safe and loved. To have a family and a future. The universe took that away from him, and it was wrong and unfair and terrible. But the universe cannot give it back. No amount of credits or power or fear can undo what was done to that boy. Varro was trembling now, a fine vibration that ran through his entire body. The only thing that can help him now is you, Elena said. You can honor that boy by becoming someone he would have been proud of. Or you can keep betraying him by becoming more and more like the monsters who hurt him. That is your choice, Captain. And only you can make it. The silence in the room was absolute. Every hostage, every soldier, every living being in that space was holding their breath. Varro looked down at Elena's hand on his arm. At this small human who had walked into his stronghold without weapons or armor or fear, he looked at the hostages. At the children huddled together in the center of the room, he looked at his soldiers. Loyal creatures who would kill or die at his command. And then Varro the Undying, the most feared pirate in 17 star systems, closed his 4 eyes and made his choice. When Varro opened his eyes again, something had changed. The cold cruelty that had always lived in his gaze was still there, but it was no longer alone beside. It was something that Elena recognized. something she had seen in her own reflection. Many years ago, when she had finally chosen to stop letting her pain define her, it was exhaustion. It was relief. It was the first fragile stirring of hope. Lower your weapons. Varus said. His soldiers looked at each other in confusion, but they had been trained to obey without question. One by one, they lowered their plasma rifles and stepped back from the hostages. Deactivate the barriers. Varus continued. The energy barriers flickered and died, and suddenly there was nothing separating the hostages from freedom except empty air. A murmur ran through the crowd of prisoners. Some of them began to cry, others simply stared, unable to believe what was happening. Little Amara Okonkwo, the Chancellor's daughter, was the first to move. She stood up on shaky legs and walked forward until she was standing in front of Elena. Are we safe now? She asked in a small voice. Lena knelt down so she was at eye level with the girl. Yes, she said. You are safe now. It is over. Amara nodded, and then, to Elena's surprise, the little girl walked past her and stopped in front of Varus. Herod King looked down at this tiny human child who should have been terrified of him. Thank you, Amara said, for letting us go. Varus stared at her for a long moment, and then he did something that no one in that room had ever seen him do before. He laughed. It was not the cruel laughter of before. It was something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like wonder. You are thanking me? He said. I am the one who took you prisoner. Child, I know, Amara said, but you are also the one who let me go. My mother says that people should always be thanked for doing the right thing, even if it is hard. Varus looked at Elena. Human children are strange creatures, he said. Yes, Elena agreed. They are. They have not yet learned to hold grudges or to hate. They still believe that everyone can be good if they try hard enough. Can they? Varus asked. Can everyone be good? I do not know, Elena said honestly, but I believe that everyone can be better than they were. And sometimes that is enough. The next few hours were chaotic. Confederation security forces boarded the station and took the hostages to safety. Medical teams treated the wounded, and counselors began the long process of helping the traumatized. Vras surrendered himself without resistance and was taken into custody along with his soldiers. Elena stayed on the station until every hostage had been evacuated, and then she finally allowed herself to rest. She was sitting alone in a quiet corner of the station, drinking a cup of terrible coffee from a vending machine. When Admiral Tarath found hers, the Volante looked at her with his liquid silver eyes and shook his head slowly. I do not understand, he said. I have been analyzing what happened in that room for hours, and I still do not understand. You had no weapons, no leverage, no power of any kind. How did you do it? I listened, Elena said, and I talked. That is all. That cannot be all, Tarath insisted. I have seen master negotiators from a dozen species fail against lesser opponents. What you did was impossible. Elena took a sip of her coffee and thought about how to explain something that she barely understood herself. Do you know what makes humans good at this? She said finally. We have been talking each other out of violence for a very long time. Longer than we have had writing or cities or even language as we understand it now. We have always known that words can be weapons and that stories can change minds. She looked out the window at the stars, but more than that, we have always known that every monster was once a child. That every tyrant has a story that made them what they are. We know this because we have seen it happen so many times in our own history. So you simply reminded him that he was once not a monster? Tarath asked, Is that really all it takes? No, Elena said. That is not all it takes. It also takes luck and timing and a willingness to die if you are wrong. And it takes genuinely caring about the person you are talking to, even if they are terrible, even if they have done awful things. She set down her coffee and looked at the Admiral. Varus was afraid and alone, and had been for most of his life. He built his empire on violence, because violence was the only language the universe had ever spoken to him. I just offered him a different language, a different story about who he could be. And if he had not accepted, then I would be dead, Elena said simply, and someone else would have had to find another way. That is how it works, Admiral. We just keep trying until something works, or until we run out of people willing to try. Tareth was silent for a long moment. Humans are very strange, he said at last. Yes. Elena agreed. We are. The news of what had happened on Kepler. Station spread across the galaxy within hours 300 hostages rescued without a single casualty. Varus, the Undying, surrendered. Peacefully, and all of it accomplished by one unarmed human woman who had walked into a room full of killers and talked them into laying down their weapons. The story was told and retold across 1,000 worlds. Some versions exaggerated Elena's role, making her into a superhero with hidden powers. Others dismissed the whole thing as propaganda or luck, but the truth was both simpler and more remarkable. Elena Vasquez had done exactly what she said she would do. She had talked Varus faced trial before the Galactic Confederation, and the proceedings lasted for 3 years. Elena testified at his trial, not to condemn him but to explain what she had learned about his history and his motivations. In the end, Varus was sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was given the opportunity to share his story with others, to help identify trafficking networks and pirate bases, to perhaps prevent others from following the path he had walked. He accepted. 20 years later, Elena retired to a small colony on the Outer Rim where she taught conflict resolution to anyone who wanted to learn. Students came from across the galaxy, beings of every species who wanted to understand how one human had done the impossible. She told them all the same thing. There is no secret, she would say. There is no trick or technique that works every time. There is only the willingness to see the being in front of you as a person, with their own fears and hopes and stories, and the stubbornness to keep talking until you find a way through. When asked about her legacy, Elena would always shake her head. I did not do anything special, she said. I just did what humans have always done. I refused to give up. In the centuries that followed, the story of Elena Vasquez and Varus, the Undying, became legend diplomatic. Schools across the galaxy studied their conversation and tried to extract lessons from it. Military strategists debated whether the outcome could have been predicted or replicated, and whenever a crisis seemed hopeless, whenever violence appeared inevitable, someone would always suggest the same thing: send a human alone and armed, let them talk, because humans had proven something that the rest of the galaxy had not quite believed, that words could be stronger than weapons, that understanding could defeat fear, that even the worst monster could choose to be something else, and that sometimes, when everything seemed lost, one stubborn person with nothing but hope and a willingness to listen could change everything. That was the human superpower, not strength or technology or weapons, just stubborn, irrational, unshakable hope, and the universe would never be quite the same again.